Every December 31st, something peculiar happens across the planet. Millions of people gather in freezing public spaces or cramped living rooms to watch a glowing sphere descend a pole. At a specific moment, midnight in their particular time zone, they scream numbers backward, embrace strangers, and weep. They drink a specific beverage, always the same beverage, from narrow glasses designed to make bubbles tickle their noses. They sing a song in a language most of them don't understand, holding hands with people whose names they may not know. Then, they make promises to themselves, solemn vows. This year will be different. This year they will exercise, save money, find love, quit drinking, write that novel, call their mothers more often. They make these promises knowing, on some level, in some quiet corner of their minds, that they will almost certainly break them within weeks. And then, at 12,001 a.m., nothing happens. The world continues turning at the same speed it always has. The stars don't shift. The laws of physics don't reset. The problems that existed at 11,059 p.m. still exist. The person you were hasn't changed. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is different. If you describe this ritual to someone who had never heard of it, they would be baffled. Why this specific night? Why the backward counting? Why do people cry? Why do they kiss strangers? Why do they believe, even momentarily, that the arbitrary tick of a clock will transform their lives? New Year's Eve might be the most philosophically absurd holiday humans have ever invented. We celebrate the passage of time at a moment that has no astronomical, agricultural, or natural significance whatsoever. January 1st is not a solstice. It's not an equinox. It's not the beginning of a harvest cycle, or the end of a harvest cycle, or the end of a season. It's approximately 10 days after the winter solstice, close enough to seem meaningful, far enough to be completely arbitrary. The date was chosen by dictators. It was imposed by conquest. It was spread by colonization. And it has been maintained by a collective agreement. Billions of people deciding together to pretend that this particular moment matters. And yet, we've built an enormous apparatus of meaning around it. Resolutions, fresh starts, hope, renewal. We've convinced ourselves that crossing this imaginary threshold will transform us, that who we are on December 31st and who we are on January 1st can somehow be different people. Tonight, we're going to examine New Year's Eve, the way an archaeologist examines an ancient ritual, with curiosity, with precision, and with a willingness to see what's actually there, rather than what we've been told is there. We'll ask the questions that no one thinks to ask. Why is January 1st the new year? Who decided this, and why? What were they trying to accomplish? Where do our traditions actually come from? Times Square, Champagne, Auld Lang Syne. These feel ancient and inevitable. They are neither. Why do we make resolutions we know will break? What psychological need does this serve? And who profits from our repeated failure? What does our obsession with fresh starts reveal about how we actually feel about our lives and ourselves? None of this is innocent. None of it is accidental. Every tradition has a history. Every ritual serves a function. And when you start pulling at the threads of New Year's Eve, what unravels is a story about power, empire, commerce, and the human desperation for meaning in a universe that offers none. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you believe that understanding the origins of our rituals helps us participate in them more honestly, or choose not to participate at all, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support allows us to keep examining the stories we tell ourselves as a civilization. Tonight, we will walk through 7 chapters of New Year's hidden history. We'll begin with the calendar wars, the struggle between empires and religions to control how humans measure time itself. We'll meet the dictator who invented January 1st and the Pope who imposed it on the world. We'll watch the early church wage a centuries-long campaign against the very celebration we now consider innocent. We'll trace how ancient vows to gods became modern promises to ourselves and how a multi-billion-dollar industry was built on our inevitable failure. We'll stand in Times Square and see the spectacle for what it really is. We'll learn the true meaning of the song we sing but don't understand. And we'll examine the champagne in our glasses, how a regional wine became mandatory, and what we're really toasting to. By the end, you'll see New Year's Eve differently. You'll understand that when you count down from 10, you're participating in something far stranger and more constructed than you ever imagined. You'll see the empires behind the calendar, the commerce behind the celebration, the manipulation behind the hope. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a way to celebrate that's actually honest, a way to mark the passage of time without pretending it will save you, a way to hope without being exploited. New Year's Eve is not what we think it is. It never was. Welcome to Late Mysteries. To understand why January 1st is the beginning of the year, you first need to understand that for most of human history, it wasn't. Different civilizations started their year at different times, based on different logic for different reasons. The ancient Egyptians began their year with the heliacal rising of Sirius, the moment when the brightest star in the night sky first appeared on the eastern horizon just before dawn. This happened in mid-July by our calendar, and it coincided with the annual flooding of the Nile, the event that made Egyptian civilization possible. The river would overflow its banks, depositing rich black silt across the farmland, and another agricultural cycle would begin. The Egyptian New Year was tied to something real, a cosmic event that directly affected their survival. The Babylonians, 4,000 years ago, celebrated their New Year at the first new moon following the spring equinox, usually sometime in late March. This made astronomical sense. The equinox is one of only 2 days per year, when day and night are equal, a genuine cosmic marker. Spring, with its rebirth of vegetation and return of warmth, seemed like an obvious time for beginnings. The ancient Greeks couldn't even agree among themselves. Different city-states started their year at different times. The Athenians began in midsummer. The Spartans began in autumn. There was no unified Greek calendar. Each polis kept time according to its own traditions. In medieval Europe, the situation was equally chaotic. Different kingdoms, different regions, sometimes different cities within the same kingdom celebrated the New Year on different dates. Some used March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel supposedly told Mary she would bear Jesus. Others used December 25th, Christmas Day. Still others used December 25th, Christmas Day, Das R, which meant the New Year fell on a different date every year. Imagine the confusion. A contract signed in Florence might be dated 1422, while the same day in Venice was still 1421. Travelers crossing from one jurisdiction to another might find themselves moving backward or forward in time. International commerce, diplomacy, and record-keeping were nightmares of conversion and confusion. Into this chaos stepped Rome, specifically, the Rome of Julius Caesar. And Caesar didn't just want to fix the calendar. He wanted to own time itself. The Roman calendar before Caesar was a mess. It was technically a lunar calendar of 355 days, which meant it fell out of alignment with the solar year by about 10 days annually. To fix this, priests were supposed to periodically add an extra month, called an intercalary month, to bring the calendar back into sync with the seasons. But here's the problem. The priests who controlled the calendar were politicians, and they quickly realized they could use the calendar as a political weapon. Roman officials served fixed terms. Consuls served for 1 year. Governors served for specific periods. If you wanted to extend an ally's term, you could add an extra month. If you wanted to cut short an enemy's term, you could skip the intercalation. The calendar became a tool of partisan warfare. By Caesar's time, the Roman calendar had drifted so far from astronomical reality that the traditional harvest festivals were falling in the middle of summer, and winter holidays were occurring during autumn. The entire system of Roman timekeeping had collapsed into political manipulation. Caesar saw an opportunity. As Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, a position he'd held since 63 BCE, he had the authority to reform the calendar. And as the most powerful man in Rome, he had the political muscle to make the reforms stick. In 46 BCE, Caesar implemented his reform. He consulted with Sosigenes, an Alexandrian astronomer, and devised a new solar calendar of 365 days, with a leap year every 4 years. This was the Julian calendar, and with minor modifications, it's still the calendar we use today. But to implement it, Caesar first had to correct the accumulated error. The Roman calendar had drifted so far that he needed to add 90 extra days to the year 46 BCE to bring it back into alignment with the seasons. 90 days. The year 46 BCE was 445 days long. The Romans called it the Year of Confusion. Imagine living through a year that was 25% longer than normal. Imagine contracts, loans, rents, terms of service, all thrown into chaos by a dictator's decree. And then, on the first day of the new calendar, January 1st, 45 BCE, this was the first time January 1st was the beginning of the year, not because of any cosmic significance, but because Caesar said so. January was named for Janus, the Roman god of doorways, beginnings, and transitions. Janus was depicted with two faces, one looking forward, one looking back. He was the god you prayed to when entering or leaving, when starting or ending, when passing through any threshold. But Janus was also the god of war. The doors of his temple in the Roman Forum were kept open during wartime and closed during peace. In the entire history of the Roman kingdom and republic, over 700 years, the doors had been closed only twice. Rome was almost always at war. Janus was almost always watching. There's a symbolism here that's worth pausing on. The month of beginnings, the threshold of the year, was named for a god associated with warfare. New Year's Day, from its very inception, carried the shadow of violence. Caesar also placed himself in the calendar. The month of Quintilis, originally just the 5th month, was renamed Julius in his honor. After Caesar's assassination, Augustus would rename Sextilis after himself. The months of July and August are monuments to Roman dictators, markers of imperial ego embedded in our measurement of time. When you say January 1st, you're speaking a date created by Julius Caesar, using a month named for a Roman war god, and a calendar designed to demonstrate imperial power over time itself. This is the foundation of our new year. Caesar's calendar was good, but it wasn't perfect. The solar year is not exactly 365-25 days. It's about 365-25 days. It's about 365-2422 days. That difference of roughly 11 minutes per year seems trivial, but over centuries it accumulates. By the 1500s, the Julian calendar had drifted about 10 days from astronomical reality. The spring equinox, which was supposed to fall on March 21st, was occurring on March 11th. This mattered to the church because Easter's date depends on the spring equinox. If the calendar was wrong, Easter was being celebrated on the wrong day. For an institution that believed it had the exclusive authority to interpret divine will, this was a serious problem. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII issued a papal bull introducing a reformed calendar. The Gregorian calendar adjusted the leap year rule slightly. Years divisible by 100 would not be leap years unless they were also divisible by 400. This small change brought the calendar much closer to the actual solar year. But to implement the reform, Gregory had to delete 10 days. In Catholic countries that adopted the calendar immediately, October 4th, 1582 was followed by October 15th, 1582. 10 days simply disappeared. The reform was also an assertion of papal authority. Protestant countries refused to adopt a Catholic calendar for generations. England and its colonies didn't switch until 1752, 17 years later. By that point, the Julian calendar had drifted another day, so England had to delete 11 days. September 2nd, 1752, was followed by September 14th, 1752. There's a persistent legend that English citizens rioted in the streets demanding, "Give us our 11 days." Historians debate whether actual riots occurred, but the resistance was real. People believed, in some visceral way, that the government had stolen time from them, that they would die 11 days sooner, that their lives had been literally shortened by decree, and in some practical sense, they were right. Rents that were due quarterly were still due on the same calendar dates, meaning landlords collected the same money for 11 fewer days of tenancy. Workers, employed by the month, worked 11 fewer days for the same pay. The calendar change was a wealth transfer, hidden in the apparent neutrality of astronomical correction. As European powers colonized the world, they brought their calendar with them, and they didn't offer options. Indigenous peoples across Africa, Asia, and the Americas had their own systems for measuring time, often sophisticated, often tied to local astronomical observations, agricultural cycles, and religious traditions. The Mayans had developed one of the most accurate calendars in human history. The Chinese lunar calendar had been refined over millennia. Hindu calendars encoded complex astronomical knowledge. Colonial administrations suppressed or marginalized these systems. Official documents, legal proceedings, commercial transactions, all required the use of the colonial calendar. Indigenous timekeeping was relegated to private religious observance, treated as superstition or folklore. Many cultures still maintain their traditional New Year celebrations. Chinese New Year, Diwali, Nowruz, Rosh Hashanah, but these exist alongside and subordinate to the Gregorian January 1st. The real New Year, the official New Year, the New Year that the global economy runs on, is the Roman date imposed by European colonization. When you celebrate January 1st, you're participating in a system of timekeeping designed by a Roman dictator, adjusted by a medieval pope, and spread across the globe by colonial violence. The date is not natural. It's not inevitable. It's a political choice that became so universal, we forgot it was ever a choice at all. The early Christian church inherited a problem it couldn't solve. People liked to party. Specifically, people liked to party. Specifically, people liked to party in late December and early January. The Roman world had a well-established tradition of winter celebration, and no amount of theological disapproval was going to make it disappear. Saturnalia, the festival of Saturn, ran from December 17th to December 23rd. It was, by all accounts, the wildest party on the Roman calendar. Schools and courts closed. Work stopped. Social norms inverted. Masters served meals to their slaves. Gambling was permitted, and a spirit of controlled chaos prevailed. People exchanged gifts, small figurines, candles, gag presents. They decorated their homes with greenery. They feasted, drank, and engaged in behaviors that would be unacceptable the rest of the year. The poet Catullus called Saturnalia the best of days. Then came Calende January, the calends of January, the first day of the new year. This was another occasion for celebration, gift-giving, public festivities, ritual visits to friends and patrons. Romans exchanged strainae, gifts of good omen, often branches from a sacred grove, sometimes coins or sweetmeats. The tradition of strainae survives in the French word étrennes, which still means New Year's gifts. The celebrations also included practices that church fathers found deeply troubling. Fortune-telling, divination, the wearing of animal masks and costumes. People dressed as deer, as old women, as the opposite gender. They sang raucous songs in the streets. They drank until they couldn't stand. For the early church, this was a theological emergency. Here were Christians, or people the church hoped to convert, participating enthusiastically in pagan rites. They were honoring false gods. They were indulging in sins of the flesh. They were embracing a worldly, carnal joy that seemed incompatible with Christian virtue. The church's response was sustained, organized, and ultimately unsuccessful. St. Augustine, in sermons delivered around 400 CE, thundered against New Year's gift-giving. The exchange of strenae, he argued, was a demonic practice. Christians who participated were committing idolatry, even if they didn't realize it. We must not give gifts on the calends, he insisted. We must not play games. We must not crown our doors with laurel. Other church fathers took up the cause. Ambrose of Milan condemned New Year's festivities. Maximus of Turin preached that Christians should fast on January 1st while pagans feasted. The contrast should be stark. Let the pagans have their day of gluttony, while Christians demonstrated their superiority through abstinence. Church councils issued formal prohibitions. The Council of Tours in 567 CE condemned the practice of celebrating January 1st. Other councils followed. The message was consistent. New Year's celebration was pagan, sinful, incompatible with the faith. The Church also tried to replace the celebration with Christian observance. January 1st was designated as the feast of the circumcision of Christ, the day, according to Jewish law, when the infant Jesus would have been circumcised, 8 days after his birth on December 25th. Instead of feasting and gift-giving, Christians were supposed to contemplate this moment of blood and covenant. It was, shall we say, a hard sell. For over 1,000 years, church authorities fought this battle. And for over 1,000 years, ordinary people kept celebrating anyway. The feasting continued, the drinking continued, the gift-giving continued. The only thing that changed was that people felt guilty about it, which for the medieval church may have been the point. Why couldn't the church suppress New Year's celebration? Part of the answer is astronomical. The winter solstice, around December 21st, is the longest night of the year in the northern hemisphere. After the solstice, the days begin to lengthen. The sun, which has been retreating since midsummer, begins its return. For agricultural societies dependent on sunlight for survival, this was genuinely significant. The return of the light was worth celebrating. It meant that winter would eventually end, that spring would come, that crops would grow again. The solstice celebration predates any religion. It's a response to astronomical reality, to the rhythms of the planet itself. Part of the answer is psychological. Winter in the pre-modern world was hard. Food was scarce. Work was brutal. Cold and darkness were constant companions. People needed a release valve, a moment of excess, of joy, of social connection in the darkest time of year. And part of the answer is simply that human beings like to celebrate. We are social animals who mark time communally. The impulse to gather, to feast, to mark transitions and thresholds. This seems to be built into us. No decree from church or state has ever successfully suppressed it. The church eventually learned this lesson. Rather than fighting the celebration, it learned to absorb it. Christmas absorbed the Saturnalia traditions of gift-giving and greenery. New Year's absorbed the traditions of feasting and fresh starts. The pagan content was hollowed out and replaced with Christian meaning, or at least Christian justification. The celebration itself survived, transformed, channeled, sometimes guilt-laden, but present. The party that Augustine tried to stop is the same party we throw today. The only difference is that now we feel good about it. The medieval church's failure to suppress New Year's celebration didn't stop others from trying. In 17th century England, the Puritans launched their own war on the holidays. They saw Christmas, Easter, and other feast days as popish corruptions, vestiges of Catholicism that true Protestants should reject. In 1647, the Puritan-controlled Parliament actually banned Christmas. Shops were required to stay open. Churches were required to stay closed. Soldiers patrolled the streets, enforcing sobriety. New Year's celebration faced similar disapproval. The Puritans viewed it as a worldly indulgence, a distraction from godly work, an occasion for sin. The same logic that condemned Christmas condemned New Year's. In colonial New England, Puritan attitudes shaped early American culture. Christmas was not widely celebrated in New England until well into the 19th century. New Year's celebrations were more accepted. They lacked the Catholic associations of Christmas, but they were supposed to be sober, reflective occasions for taking stock of one's spiritual conditions, The Puritan suspicion of celebration left a mark on American culture that persists today. There's always been a strain of American thought that views pleasure as suspect, festivity as frivolous, joy as somehow irresponsible. Even as we celebrate New Year's Eve, part of us feels guilty about it, feels that we should be doing something more productive, more serious, more worthy. This is the theological inheritance we bring to New Year's Eve. 2,000 years of authorities, telling us that celebration is sinful, that joy is dangerous, that we should feel bad about feeling good. The party continues, despite this inheritance, but the guilt continues too. The New Year's resolution is not a modern invention. People have been making promises at the New Year for at least 4,000 years. The Babylonians, during their 12-day New Year festival called Akitu, made promises to their gods. They would return borrowed objects. They would pay their debts. They would right the wrongs of the previous year. These weren't self-improvement projects. They were religious and social obligations. If you had borrowed your neighbor's plow, you gave it back. If you owed money to a creditor, you settled up. The logic was theological. The gods were watching. The New Year was a time of divine judgment, when the gods determined the fate of individuals and nations for the coming year. Making and keeping your promises was a way of currying divine favor, of entering the new year with a clean slate before heaven. The Romans had similar traditions. They made promises to Janus, the two-faced god who watched over beginnings and endings. Roman New Year vows were often public, political, civic. Magistrates promised to uphold the laws. Soldiers renewed their oaths of loyalty. Citizens committed to the welfare of the state. In medieval Europe, knights renewed their vows at the end of the Christmas season. They would place their hands on a peacock, the symbol of immortality and integrity, and recommit to the values of chivalry. This peacock vow was a public performance, a demonstration of honor before one's peers. Notice what all these ancient resolutions have in common. They were external. They were promises made to gods, to communities, to social institutions. They were about fulfilling obligations to others, not improving oneself. The ancient resolution was fundamentally relational. It bound you to something larger than yourself. The modern New Year's resolution, the promise to lose weight, exercise more, quit smoking, be a better person, is a fundamentally different thing. It's private rather than public, psychological rather than social, focused on the self rather than the community. This transformation happened gradually, but the Protestant Reformation was crucial. Luther and Calvin redirected religious focus from external observance to internal faith. What mattered was not the rituals you performed, but the state of your soul. Salvation was a matter between you and God. No priest, no sacrament, no institution could mediate it. This theological shift encouraged constant self-examination. Protestants were supposed to monitor their own spiritual condition, to search their hearts for signs of grace or damnation. The inner life became the primary terrain of religious work. The new year became an occasion for this self-examination. Puritan diaries from the 17th and 18th centuries show believers taking spiritual inventory at year's end, examining their sins, resolving to do better, recommitting to godly discipline. The resolution was becoming personal. Benjamin Franklin, in many ways the archetypal American, took this process to its logical extreme. His famous project of moral perfection, tracking his daily adherence to 13 virtues, was a secularized version of the Puritan self-examination. The goal was no longer to please God, but to improve oneself. The methods were the same: careful observation, honest accounting, renewed resolution. By the 19th century, the New Year's resolution was recognizably modern. Newspaper editorials encouraged readers to use the new year as an occasion for self-improvement. The language shifted from religious to secular. Not, "I resolve to be more godly," but "I resolve to wake earlier," or "I resolve to drink less." The object of improvement was no longer the soul, but the self. And the self was increasingly understood in terms of habits, behaviors, productivity. The resolution was becoming personal. Today, the New Year's resolution is big business. The self-improvement industry in the United States alone is worth over $70 billion annually. This includes gym memberships, diet programs, self-help books, apps, courses, coaching, supplements, equipment, and countless other products and services designed to help people become better versions of themselves. And New Year's is the industry's Super Bowl. Gym memberships spiked dramatically in January. Fitness centers explicitly plan for this. They oversell memberships knowing that most January joiners will stop coming by February. A gym that can comfortably accommodate 300 members might sell 1,000 memberships, confident that only 300 will ever show up at the same time. Diet programs launch massive advertising campaigns in late December and early January. Weight Watchers, Noom, Jenny Craig, all ramp up their marketing to capture resolution makers. The message is always the same: this year will be different. This program will work. This time, you'll finally succeed. Self-help book sales peak in the first quarter of the year. Publishers time their releases accordingly. The promise is always transformation. Read this book and become the person you've always wanted to be. But here's the thing. The industry depends on failure. Studies consistently show that somewhere between 80 and 90% of New Year's resolutions fail. Most people have abandoned their resolutions by mid-January. The gym empties out. The diet lapses. The book sits unfinished on the nightstand. And then, next January, they try again. They rejoin the gym. They start a new diet. They buy another book. The cycle repeats year after year. Failure after failure. If people actually achieved their resolutions, if they got fit, stayed fit, and stopped needing gym memberships and diet programs, the industry would collapse. The business model depends on repeat customers. It depends on failure. This isn't necessarily a conspiracy. No shadowy cabal is deliberately designing programs to fail, but the incentive structure is real. Companies that help people achieve permanent change put themselves out of business. Companies that provide temporary motivation, followed by predictable relapse, have customers for life. Why do we keep making resolutions when we know they'll probably fail? Psychologists have identified what they call the fresh start effect. Temporal landmarks, New Year's, birthdays, the start of a new week, even the first of a new month, create a sense of psychological distance from our past selves. We feel, in some hard-to-articulate way, that the person who failed before is not quite the same person who is resolving now. This can be motivating. The fresh start effect does increase goal-setting behavior. People are more likely to begin new projects, start new habits, and make commitments at temporal landmarks than at random points in time. But the effect also has a dark side. The same mechanism that motivates us to start also gives us permission to fail. If we lapse, we can wait for the next fresh start. Next Monday, next month, next year. The temporal landmark becomes not just a starting point, but an excuse for delay. And the arbitrary nature of January 1st may actually undermine sustained effort. Real change, the kind that sticks, typically requires ongoing adjustment, course correction, and persistence through setbacks. The January 1st mindset encourages all or nothing thinking. Either you're keeping your resolution, or you're not. Once you've failed, you might as well wait until next year to try again. The resolution ritual may actually make lasting change harder, not easier. It channels our desire for improvement into a structure almost designed to produce failure. There's something worth examining in the resolution ritual, beyond its effectiveness, or lack thereof. The tradition encodes a message about what human life should be. The message is, you are not good enough as you are. You need to be fixed. You need to be improved. Your value depends on constant striving toward a better version of yourself. This is the ideology of capitalism applied to the self. Just as the economy must always grow, must always produce more, must never be satisfied with the current state of things, so too must you. You are a project to be optimized, a product to be improved, an asset to be developed. Contentment becomes impossible, or at least suspect. To be satisfied with yourself as you are, this is framed as complacency, as settling, as failure to achieve your potential. The only acceptable stance toward the self is one of perpetual dissatisfaction and perpetual striving. The New Year's resolution is the ritual expression of this ideology. Once a year, we formally acknowledge that we are inadequate. We list our deficiencies. We commit to fixing them. We participate in a cultural moment that assumes and reinforces the inadequacy of the self. What would it mean to approach the new year not as a project of self-improvement, but as an affirmation of self-acceptance? To enter January not with a list of failures to fix, but with gratitude for what is. To resist the ritual of inadequacy and simply be? This is not an argument against growth or change. It's an observation that the resolution ritual, specifically as it has developed in our culture, serves purposes that may not be in our interest. It keeps us buying. It keeps us striving. It keeps us striving. It keeps us dissatisfied. And it does this by taking our genuine desire for meaning and channeling it into forms that serve commerce. Times Square wasn't always the center of American New Year's celebration. Before 1904, it wasn't even called Times Square. The area was known as Longacre Square, named after a similar district in London. It was the center of New York's carriage trade, harness makers, horse traders, stables. Not glamorous, but vital to the city's transportation infrastructure. In 1904, the New York Times moved its headquarters to a new skyscraper at the intersection of 7th Avenue and Broadway. The newspaper's owner, Adolph Oakes, was a master of publicity. He lobbied the city to rename the square after his paper, and the city, seeing the value of associating the area with a prestigious newspaper, agreed. To celebrate the move, Oakes threw a massive New Year's Eve party. On December 31st, 1904, an estimated 200,000 people gathered in the newly renamed Times Square. There were fireworks launched from the roof of the Times building. There were concerts and celebrations. At midnight, the crowd erupted. It was a triumph of publicity. Oakes had created a public event that associated his newspaper with celebration, with the new year, with the future of New York City. The Times Square New Year's Eve was, from its very first moment, a marketing operation. Early New Year's Eve celebrations in New York were genuinely dangerous. Before Times Square became the center of celebration, New Year's Eve in New York was a chaotic, sometimes violent affair. People gathered in the streets, drank heavily, and fired guns into the air at midnight. The practice of shooting guns to mark the new year was widespread across America, and it killed people every year. Fireworks were another hazard. Unregulated, set off by amateurs in crowded streets, they caused fires and injuries. Every New Year's brought reports of people burned, buildings damaged, celebrations turned to tragedy. The crowds themselves were dangerous. Without modern crowd control techniques, without barriers or designated areas, masses of people packed into streets created crush risks. People were trampled, suffocated, injured in panics. In 1907, the city banned the fireworks that had been launched from the Times building's roof. The displays were spectacular, but the fire risk in a city still full of wooden buildings was too great. Oaks needed a new spectacle. The solution was elegant, a ball of light lowered from the top of the Times building at midnight. The first Times Square ball, lowered on December 31st, 1907, was made of iron and wood, studded with 105-watt light bulbs. It was 5 feet in diameter and weighed about 700 pounds. It was lowered down a flagpole by building engineers, reaching the bottom at precisely midnight. The ball was visible for blocks. It was spectacular without being dangerous. It gave the crowd something to focus on, a shared visual experience that climaxed at exactly the right moment. And it was controllable. The Times owned the ball, owned the building, owned the spectacle. The ball drop continued every year except 1942 and 1943, when wartime blackout regulations made the illumination inappropriate. Even during those years, crowds gathered in Times Square. They just did so in darkness, marking midnight with a moment of silence instead of light. The ball has been redesigned multiple times over the decades. Today's ball is 12 feet in diameter, weighs nearly 12,000 pounds, and is covered with 2,688 Waterford crystal triangles, illuminated by 32,256 LED lights, capable of displaying 16 million colors. It's a technological marvel. It's also a product placement. The Waterford Crystal brand has been associated with the ball since 2000. Every shot of the ball is a shot of Waterford Crystal. The technological upgrade was also a marketing upgrade. The televised version of Times Square New Year's Eve is a spectacle of celebration. What you don't see on television is what it's actually like to be there. If you want to be anywhere near the ball drop, you need to arrive early, very early. The prime viewing areas require arrival in the early afternoon for a midnight event. That means standing in a designated pen for 8 to 10 hours. Yes, pens. The crowd is divided into sections, separated by barriers. Once you're in your pen, you can't leave. If you leave to use the bathroom, you can't come back. The streets are closed. There's nowhere to go anyway. Speaking of bathrooms, there aren't many. Some people wear adult diapers. This is not a joke. If you search for advice on attending Times Square New Year's Eve, you will find serious recommendations to wear absorbent undergarments because the bathroom situation is that bad. You can't sit down. The crowd is too dense. For 8 to 10 hours, you stand. It's cold. Late December in New York means temperatures that can drop into the 20s or teens. You're standing still, not generating body heat from movement. Hand warmers and thermal underwear are essential. Alcohol is officially prohibited. Bags are searched. The ban is imperfectly enforced. But the party atmosphere Americans associate with New Year's Eve is officially forbidden in the iconic American New Year's Eve location. And depending on where you're standing, you might not even be able to see the ball. The viewing angles are limited. Many people in Times Square on New Year's Eve watch the ball drop on the screens mounted around the area, watching a broadcast of an event happening a few hundred feet away. This is the reality beneath the spectacle. Hours of discomfort for 60 seconds of shared experience. People do it anyway because the spectacle has become synonymous with the celebration. Being there matters, even if being there is miserable. Times Square itself is a monument to advertising. The area's iconic character, the massive digital billboards, the screens on every surface, is not accidental. Zoning regulations in Times Square actually require buildings to have illuminated signage. The advertising is mandated by law. The spectacle is designed. On New Year's Eve, this commercial environment becomes the backdrop for what's presented as authentic celebration. The television broadcast, which reaches tens of millions of viewers, is essentially hours of advertising punctuated by entertainment. Corporate sponsors pay millions to be associated with the event. Their logos appear on stage, on screens, in the background of every shot. The ball drop itself, the climactic moment, lasts about 60 seconds. The television broadcast runs for hours. What fills those hours? Musical performances sponsored by brands, celebrity appearances promoting projects, interviews and segments designed to keep viewers watching through the commercial breaks. Dick Clark, who hosted ABC's New Year's Rockin' Eve from 1972 until his death in 2012, understood this perfectly. He created a format that was entertaining enough to hold attention and commercial enough to generate massive revenue. The broadcast wasn't about the celebration. It was about using the celebration to sell eyeballs to advertisers. The Times Square New Year's Eve is, in this sense, the purest expression of contemporary American culture, a pseudo-event manufactured for media, designed to sell products, experienced primarily through screens even by people who are physically present. We watch an advertisement and call it tradition. Auld Lang Syne is credited to Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, the man who gave us A Red, Red Rose and To a Mouse, and countless other works that define Scottish literary identity. But Burns didn't write Auld Lang Syne. Or rather, he didn't exactly write it. In 1788, Burns sent a version of the song to the Scots Musical Museum, a collection of traditional Scottish songs he was helping to compile. In his accompanying letter, he described the song as an old song of the olden times, and which has never been in print, nor even in manuscript, until I took it down from an old man singing. Burns was a collector as much as a creator. He traveled through Scotland, listening to ordinary people sing traditional songs, and transcribed what he heard. Sometimes he polished the lyrics, added verses, improved the structure. Sometimes he preserved them as he found them. With Auld Lang Syne, the degree of his contribution is unclear. Parts of the song appear in earlier printed sources. The phrase Auld Lang Syne itself appears in a poem from 1711, decades before Burns was born. The melody is traditional, possibly very old. What Burns definitely did was give the song the form we know today and, crucially, give it his name. When the Scots Musical Museum published the song, it was associated with Burns. When anthologies reprinted it, they credited Burns. The attribution stuck, and now, most people assume he created it whole cloth. This matters because Auld Lang Syne represents something older than Burns, older than the 18th century, older, perhaps, than written record. It's a song about a human experience so fundamental that people have been singing about it for centuries. The pain of time passing and friends drifting away. Most people who sing Auld Lang Syne don't know what they're singing. The Scots dialect makes the lyrics opaque to English speakers, and even people who know the words rarely pause to consider their meaning. Auld Lang Syne translates roughly as old long since or old long ago. More idiomatically, times gone by or days of old. The opening lines ask a question. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old friends be forgotten? Should the times we shared be allowed to fade from memory? The song doesn't directly answer this question. Instead, it presents images of those old times. Two friends running through the hillsides picking daisies together, wading through streams from morning to evening. Innocent childhood memories, simple and golden. But those times are gone. The friends have wandered many a weary foot. Since those days, the seas have rolled between them. Literally or metaphorically, they've drifted apart. The closeness of childhood has given way to the distance of adult life. And yet, the song proposes a response to this loss. Let's take a cup of kindness. Let's drink together. The drinking is explicitly compensatory. We cannot recover the past, but we can acknowledge it. We can toast to what was, even as we accept that it's gone. This is not an optimistic song. It's a song about loss. The loss of time, of youth, of connection. The warmth of the melody and the ritual context make it feel celebratory. But the actual content is melancholic. We're singing about how everything ends. Auld Lang Syne came to America with Scottish immigrants, but it didn't become the definitive New Year's song until the 20th century. The crucial figure was Guy Lombardo, a Canadian bandleader whose orchestra, the Royal Canadians, became synonymous with New Year's Eve broadcasts for half a century. In 1929, Lombardo and his band performed a New Year's Eve radio broadcast from the Roosevelt Grill in New York City. At midnight, they played Auld Lang Syne. The broadcast was heard across the country. Lombardo continued the tradition every year, eventually moving to television. For decades, his orchestra's version of Auld Lang Syne was what Americans heard at midnight on New Year's Eve. The association became automatic, inevitable seeming. It's hard to imagine New Year's without the song, but that inevitability was created by one band leader's aesthetic choice, repeated and amplified by mass media. The Lombardo version set the template, the stately tempo, the swelling strings, the feeling of sentimental climax. Other versions followed, but they all refer back to this model. Even when the song is performed differently, we hear it through ears trained by Lombardo. At midnight on December 31st, hundreds of millions of people around the world sing a song. Most of them don't understand. They don't know the words. Even when they think they know the words, they often don't. What do you sing after the first verse? Most people have no idea. They don't know what the words mean. They don't know who wrote it or when or why. They hold hands with strangers. They sway back and forth. They mumble through the parts they don't know and belt out Auld Lang Syne at the moments when they're supposed to, and there's something beautiful in this and something deeply strange. The beauty is in the collective participation. People who have nothing in common, who may not share language or culture or values, are doing the same thing at the same time. The song creates a moment of unity that transcends individual understanding. The strangeness is in what that unity is built on, a shared ignorance. We're not unified by understanding, but by our collective willingness to participate in a ritual we don't comprehend. The form matters more than the content. The performance matters more than the meaning. Maybe this is what rituals are. Maybe meaning isn't the point. Maybe the point is doing something together, marking a moment together, being part of something larger than yourself. Even if you don't know what that something is, or maybe we've hollowed out something meaningful, replaced substance with form, and convinced ourselves the form is enough. The legend goes like this. In the late 17th century, a blind Benedictine monk named Dom Pierre Perignon accidentally created sparkling wine in the cellars of the Abbey of Hautevillers. Upon tasting his creation, he called out to his fellow monks, "Come quickly, I am drinking the stars." It's a perfect origin story. Accidental genius, sensory revelation, a poetic exclamation that captures the magic of the beverage. It's printed on marketing materials, repeated in wine tours, taught as fact. It's also almost entirely fictional. Dom Perignon was a real person, and he did work at the Abbey of Hautevillers in the Champagne region of France during the late 17th century. He was, by all accounts, a skilled winemaker who made important contributions to viticulture, innovations in pressing grapes, blending different varieties, improving cellar techniques. But he didn't invent sparkling wine. Sparkling wine existed before him. English scientists had described the process of secondary fermentation that creates bubbles decades before Perignon began working. More importantly, Perignon actually spent much of his career trying to prevent bubbles. In 17th century Champagne, the effervescence was considered a defect, not a feature. The bubbles caused bottles to explode in the cellar, a serious problem that could destroy an entire vintage. A good winemaker was supposed to produce still wine. The sparkle was a sign of failure. The famous quote, "I am drinking the stars," was invented in the 19th century, nearly 150 years after Perignon's death. It first appeared in advertisements and promotional materials for champagne producers. It was marketing copy, not historical record. The Dom Perignon brand, owned today by Moet Hennessy, perpetuates the legend because the legend sells bottles. The romantic origin story transforms a fermented grape beverage into something magical, something touched by accident and genius. You're not just drinking wine, you're drinking the stars. Champagne's association with celebration was deliberately constructed. In the 18th and 19th centuries, champagne producers faced a problem. Their product was expensive to make, fragile to ship, and limited in production. They couldn't compete on volume with other wine regions. They needed to compete on prestige. The solution was to associate champagne with aristocratic celebration. Champagne houses cultivated relationships with royal courts across Europe. They supplied champagne to coronations, weddings, diplomatic functions. They made sure that wherever powerful people gathered to celebrate, champagne was poured. The dramatic elements of champagne service, the loud pop of the cork, the overflow of foam, the spray of liquid, were exploited and encouraged. These weren't just incidental features. They were theatrical elements that signaled celebration. That said, something special is happening. Racing became particularly important. Champagne producers began sponsoring yacht races, horse races, automobile races, events where winners could be photographed, spraying champagne in celebration. The images spread through newspapers and later, television. The association became automatic. Victory equals champagne. The tradition of spraying champagne on the winner's podium in motorsport dates to 1967, when Dan Gurney won the 24 Hours of Le Mans and, on an apparent whim, shook up a bottle of champagne and sprayed it over the crowd and his fellow drivers. The image was so striking that it became standard practice. Now it seems like it's always been done, but it started with one spontaneous act, captured by cameras, repeated because it looked good. Here's a question worth asking. Why champagne? Sparkling wine is made in many regions. Spanish cava, Italian prosecco, German sekt, American sparkling wines, all offer effervescence at lower prices. Some, by many accounts, taste as good or better than mid-range champagne. The taste of champagne is not universally beloved. It's acidic, yeasty, with flavors that many people find unpleasant until they've learned to appreciate them. Children, offered champagne for the first time, typically grimace. The taste is acquired. There's nothing about the liquid itself that makes it inherently celebratory. It's wine with bubbles. The bubbles are created by a second fermentation in the bottle, a process that any competent winemaker can replicate. The geographical designation, only sparkling wine from the Champagne region can legally be called champagne in most countries, is a legal protection, not a quality guarantee. The association between champagne and celebration is entirely cultural, and that culture was deliberately shaped by commercial interests over more than 2 centuries. This isn't necessarily a criticism. All culture is constructed. All traditions have origins in someone's choices. But the champagne tradition is worth noting because it's so effective that it feels natural. We believe we're drinking champagne because celebration demands champagne, when actually celebration demands champagne because we've been taught that it does. On New Year's Eve, champagne becomes almost obligatory. People who don't particularly like champagne drink it anyway. The ritual demands it. To celebrate the new year without champagne would feel incomplete, like having a birthday without a cake. Restaurants capitalize on this. New Year's Eve prix-fixe menus, already marked up significantly from normal prices, often require the purchase of champagne or include it complimentary, built into the inflated price. The wine list that usually offers choices becomes a single, predetermined selection. Stores stock massive quantities of champagne and sparkling wine in December. The markup is significant. Champagne that costs $40 in October might cost $50 or $60 in late December. The demand is predictable, so the pricing follows. And at midnight, at parties across the world, glasses are raised. The ritual is enacted. People drink what they're supposed to drink when they're supposed to drink it, because that's what the ritual demands. The champagne toast is one of the clearest examples of how commercial interests shape our celebrations. We don't choose champagne. Champagne chooses us through centuries of marketing, association building, and cultural engineering. This doesn't make the toast meaningless. Shared rituals create connection, even when their origins are commercial. But it's worth knowing what we're participating in. We're not just celebrating the new year. We're participating in a tradition designed to sell us a specific product. For many people, New Year's Eve is not a celebration. It's an ordeal. The holiday season more broadly, the stretch from Thanksgiving through New Year's in the United States, or from early December through New Year's elsewhere, is a period of elevated psychological distress for significant portions of the population. Depression worsens for many people during the holidays. The contrast between the mandated cheer of the season and their internal state creates a particular kind of pain. Everyone is supposed to be happy. Everyone is supposed to be celebrating. If you're not happy, if you're not celebrating, you feel like a failure on top of everything else. Loneliness is more acute when everyone else seems to be together. The images of celebration on television, on social media, in advertising, emphasize togetherness, family, connection. If you're alone, if you're estranged from family, if you don't have the warm gathering that the culture says you're supposed to have, the season becomes a constant reminder of what you lack. New Year's Eve concentrates these pressures. It's framed as the most celebratory night of the year. You're supposed to have plans. You're supposed to be with people. You're supposed to kiss someone at midnight. You're supposed to be ecstatic as the clock strikes 12. If you're depressed or lonely or grieving or simply not in a celebrating mood, this pressure is cruel. The holiday doesn't accommodate you. It demands your participation anyway. January 1st doesn't change anything. This is obvious when stated directly, but the ritual of the holiday suggests otherwise. The countdown, the cheering, the emphasis on new beginnings and fresh starts. All of this implies that crossing from December 31st to January 1st is meaningful, transformative, magical. Your problems don't reset at midnight. Your debts are still there. Your health issues are still there. Your health issues are still there. Your relationship difficulties, your career frustrations, your family tensions, all still there. The Earth continues its orbit without noticing. The second after midnight is materially indistinguishable from the second before. The fresh start is a psychological construct, not an objective reality. And while psychological constructs can be powerful, this particular one may do as much harm as good. The myth of the magic threshold encourages all or nothing thinking. You're either keeping your resolution or you failed. You're either having a great new year or you're not. The calendar provides a hard boundary that doesn't match how change actually works. Real change, the kind that sticks, is usually gradual, non-linear, full of setbacks and adjustments. It can start on any day, not just January 1st. It doesn't require a magical threshold. But the New Year's ritual encourages us to wait for the threshold, to load all our hopes for change onto a single arbitrary date. New Year's Eve may be the most performative night of the year. The pressure to have a good time is intense. Social media amplifies this. People post their most glamorous moments, their happiest looking photos, their most enviable celebrations. The feed fills with images of joy, connection, success. But these images are curated. They show the highlight reel, not the reality. The person posting the ecstatic photo may have spent most of the evening bored or anxious. The couple kissing at midnight may be on the verge of breaking up. The party that looks amazing in pictures may have felt flat and forced in person. Studies consistently show that people overestimate how much fun others are having and underestimate their own experiences. On New Year's Eve, this tendency reaches its peak. Everyone is trying to have a great time, and everyone is performing having a great time. And almost no one is willing to admit that the evening might not live up to the hype. The result is a kind of collective delusion. We're all pretending to each other that we're having the time of our lives, and we all feel secretly inadequate because everyone else seems to be having such a better time. January 1st arrives and we wake up, often hungover, often tired, often vaguely disappointed. The magical night is over. We're the same people we were before, but we've successfully performed celebration for each other. Maintain the myth for another year. Maintain the myth for another year. Hope is a fundamental human need. We need to believe that things can get better, that the future holds its possibility, that we're not trapped in our current circumstances forever. New Year's Eve taps into this need. The holiday is, at its core, about hope. The hope that the new year will be better than the old one, that we can change, that good things are coming. This genuine human need has been thoroughly commercialized. The advertising industry treats January as New Year, New You season. The message is everywhere. Buy this product and become a better version of yourself. The gym membership will make you fit. The diet program will make you thin. The app will make you productive. The course will make you successful. Hope becomes a consumer good. You purchase it in the form of products and services that promise transformation. And when the transformation doesn't happen, when you stop going to the gym, when you abandon the diet, when the app sits unused on your phone, you can purchase hope again next year. The cycle continues because hope is inexhaustible. No matter how many times we've been disappointed, we can hope again. It's a beautiful human quality, and it's ruthlessly exploited by industries that profit from our perpetual striving. The cruelty of this system is that it takes something genuine, our desire for growth, for change, for a better life, and channels it into forms that serve commerce rather than human flourishing. We're encouraged to hope, but only in ways that involve purchasing products. We're encouraged to change, but only in ways that create customers. A genuine hope would be free. It would be available to everyone, regardless of purchasing power. It would point toward forms of growth that don't require buying anything. The hope we're sold on New Year's Eve is not that kind of hope. It's hope with a price tag. Hope that somebody profits from. Hope that keeps us striving, keeps us dissatisfied, keeps us buying. We've traveled through 2,000 years of New Year's history tonight, and here's what we found. January 1st is a date chosen by a Roman dictator, adjusted by a medieval pope, and spread across the globe by colonial conquest. It has no astronomical or natural significance. It's approximately 10 days after the winter solstice, close enough to feel meaningful, arbitrary enough to have been placed anywhere else. The celebration we practice was fought against by Christian authorities for over a millennium. They condemned it as pagan, sinful, a dangerous indulgence of worldly pleasure. They lost. The human need to celebrate in the darkest season was stronger than any theological objection. The resolution ritual evolved from religious vows to gods and communities into private promises of self-improvement. Along the way, it was captured by a multi-billion-dollar industry that profits from our repeated failure. Times Square became the center of American celebration through a newspaper owner's publicity stunt. The ball drop was invented to replace dangerous fireworks. The televised spectacle is essentially an advertising delivery system. The song we sing was collected by Robert Burns from an old man's memory, and its actual content is melancholic, a meditation on lost friendship and the passage of time. Most of us don't know the words, don't know what they mean, and sing it anyway. Champagne's association with celebration was manufactured by centuries of marketing. The monk who supposedly invented it actually spent his career trying to prevent bubbles. The tradition of toasting with champagne at midnight is commercial engineering so successful that it feels like natural law, and the whole apparatus, the countdown, the hope, the fresh start, can be cruel to those who are lonely, depressed, grieving, or simply not in a celebrating mood. The mandatory optimism excludes those who can perform it. Here's the strange thing. Knowing all this doesn't necessarily change anything. All human meaning is constructed. All traditions have origins in someone's choices, choices that could have been different. The fact that January 1st is arbitrary doesn't make it less real as a shared cultural experience. The fact that champagne's association with celebration was manufactured doesn't make the toast feel less celebratory. We are meaning-making creatures. We take arbitrary moments and invest them with significance. We create rituals that connect us to each other and to the past. We construct frameworks that help us navigate time's passage. The question isn't whether our traditions are constructed. They all are. The question is whether we construct them consciously or unconsciously, whether we participate by choice or by default, whether we know what we're doing or do it blindly. After tonight, you know. You know the history behind the holiday. You know the commercial interests that shape our celebration. You know the psychology that our rituals exploit. This knowledge gives you something valuable, the ability to choose. You don't have to stop celebrating New Year's Eve. You don't have to boycott the traditions or refuse the champagne or sit out the countdown. That's not what this is about. But you can celebrate differently. You can participate consciously, with awareness of what you're doing and why. You can acknowledge the arbitrary nature of the date and find meaning anyway. The solstice has just passed. The days are getting longer. Winter is half over. There's something genuinely worth marking in that. Even if January 1st isn't the precise moment, you can reflect without resolving. Take stock of the year behind you. Notice what you're grateful for, what you regret, what you've learned. But you don't have to turn this reflection into a list of self-improvement projects. You don't have to enter the new year with a burden of inadequacy. You can celebrate what you are, not just what you might become. The ideology of constant improvement assumes that who you are right now is insufficient. This is not necessarily true. You might be doing fine. You might be doing better than fine. The new year doesn't require you to be dissatisfied with yourself. You can find joy in the actual moment, not the symbolic moment. The people with you tonight are real. The food is real. The warmth and light in the darkest season are real. You don't need the clock to strike 12 for these things to matter. You can resist the commercial pressure. You don't have to spend a fortune on New Year's Eve. You don't have to have the most Instagram-worthy celebration. You don't have to prove to anyone that you're having a good time. You can have a quiet evening, a modest gathering, a genuine connection, none of which requires purchasing anything. And if you're not in a celebrating mood, if this is a hard time for you, if you're grieving or struggling or simply exhausted, you can give yourself permission to opt out. The holiday is not compulsory. Your worth as a person doesn't depend on performing joy for others. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to go to bed early. At midnight on January 1st, the Earth will continue its orbit around the sun. The moon will continue its orbit around the Earth. The stars will shine, indifferent to our calendars. The universe will take no notice of our celebration. And yet, something will happen. Millions of people will pause together. They will count backward from 10. They will shout at the darkness. They will embrace each other, sing together, cry together. They will mark a moment that is meaningless astronomically, but profoundly meaningful humanly. We are the creatures who make meaning. We take an arbitrary moment and invest it with hope. We construct shared experiences that connect us across distances and differences. We tell each other that time is passing, that something is ending, that something new might begin. There's something both absurd and beautiful in this. We know the date is arbitrary. We know the magic is constructed, and we participate anyway because the participation itself is real. The connection is real. The hope, however commercialized, points towards something genuine. The fresh start you're waiting for doesn't arrive at midnight. It's not delivered by the calendar. It doesn't depend on resolutions or rituals or the ticking of a clock. The fresh start arrives when you decide it does. It's available right now, this moment, whether it's January 1st or July 15th or a random Tuesday in March. The power to change doesn't wait for temporal landmarks. It exists in you continuously, regardless of what the calendar says. So this New Year's Eve, as the ball drops and the champagne pops and the song plays, be present. Not in the symbolic moment, but in the real one. The person next to you is real. The breath you're taking is real. Your life, as it is right now, flawed and incomplete and imperfect, is real. The countdown means nothing, but the people counting with you mean something. The darkness outside is real, and so is the light we create together. Happy New Year. May your celebrations be honest. May your hope be grounded, and may you find renewal not at midnight, but whenever you're ready to begin. Thank you for journeying through New Year's hidden history with us. Thank you for keeping the candle lit. Thank you for seeking truth in a season of comfortable myth. Until next time. Welcome to